What is up, people, and welcome back to the Storey StrengthCast with myself, Shane Storey. Today we have a solo podcast in store. It's been a while since the start of the year. I have been getting guests on, which has been extremely enjoyable, and we do have more coming on in the next few weeks, so don't worry. You don't have to just listen to me shy talking. However, if you are a new listener, very, very welcome. If you haven't listened to any of the earlier podcasts, I definitely recommend giving them a listen. Get a good feel for who I am, what I'm like, my thoughts on training, nutrition, mindset, all that good stuff, and you might learn a thing or two as well. So in today's podcast, we are going to be talking about my upcoming powerlifting competition and the fact that it's going to be my last one for a while. Are there things that I'm going to do slightly differently this time? Things that I'm going to be focusing on during my prep, how I might be going about making weight, and some more little bits and bobs I'm going to throw in there too. Some maybe random tangents that I might not be able to pull myself back from. But anyway, look, we're here for a long time, not a good time. So strap in. Before we get into the actual pod, if you do me a big favor and leave me a rating and review on the podcast platform that you're listening on, it does help the podcast grow. Look at all the cool guests that I've gotten on recently, right? That's only because you, the listener, you listen, you give me those ratings, and I can get bigger and better podcast guests on in the future. I have some guys that have got back to me and said, "Hey Shane, once you get up to a certain amount of listens or a certain amount of downloads, we can consider coming on." So let's make that happen, okay? Share it in your stories. Help me push this thing out, right? And then you'll get better podcasts coming in the future, okay? All right. So yeah, once you help me out, I can help you out and kind of make your brain expand, or at least give you some entertainment. But anyway, so I'm going to be doing my final powerlifting competition for the next few years on April 19th. I'm going to be doing Ab Series 21, which is the undercard to the Clash of the Titans 3, which is probably going to be one of the biggest powerlifting competitions that has been in Ireland in maybe ever. Okay, because you do have like the top 2 powerlifters of all time coming over to compete. Definitely going to be the strongest platform that's ever been competing at the same time in Ireland, maybe even Europe, maybe even world. I don't know. I don't know about powerlifting history well enough, but definitely Europe, I'd say you have nearly 10 guys, all who are either 1,000 plus totals or just under 1,000 plus totals. So that's going to be really cool to watch as a fan of the sport. But my flight is going to be on before that. So we're the undercard. We are going to be competing in the Pro-Am division. It's going to be my second time competing in the Pro-Am division, and I am really, really excited for it. To be honest, if you asked me at the start of the year, was I excited for it, I probably would have told you I kind of regret signing up. I've been feeling a bit of, I guess, apathy towards powerlifting. And this is not just like a recent thing, right? And it's not because my training's gone bad. Like, my training's actually gone quite well. Like, my training's, like, I'm probably the strongest I've ever been. Like before Christmas, I did the December Open, the IPF December Open, and I won it overall. I've never won something like that. I've never, like, even to be podiuming at that, right? Because I did come second in my weight class, but based off the coefficient and everything, I did win the overall, right? And that was generally, it was class. It was a good feeling. It was a sign of, like, hard work paying off. However, still, and even leading into that competition, it's just like, why did I sign up for this? And I think when I get to that point, and having gotten to that point now with 2 competitions, I do have to kind of take a step back and say, okay, do I really want to just continue pursuing this goal? I don't really have as much of a drive towards building towards certain numbers anymore. So prior to Christmas and prior to the December Open, big long time goal of mine was getting that 300 kilo deadlift. I did it, and I guess, like, for me, anytime I achieve a goal, the feeling of achieving it is never as enjoyable as the process of getting there. Like, when I hit 300, like, it felt good for maybe a day, and then after the day it was done, I was like, okay, well, what's next? Do I have another deadlift goal? Like, of course you could say, oh, like, get up to 6 reds, get up to 317, which is 700 pounds, but I don't really have the same kind of drive towards those. Like, it'd be cool and all, but, like, I'm not as, like, pumped to go towards those. when I look at the likes of my squat, to be honest, like it'd be nice to get up to 600 pounds, which is like 7.5 kilo away in sleeves, or 275, which would be 5 reds. But again, I don't really have this kind of same kind of I don't have the same fire for that as I did with the likes of 300 kilo deadlift. And, you know, kind of feel as if I've already kind of accomplished those anyways, because I did 280 last year in reps. This year in reps, I'm hoping to squat close to 300. So I kind of feel like I've kind of done everything that I want to do with powerlifting for now, at least. One of my long-term goals is definitely to try to qualify for an international competition. However, you know, whether that's in open, which would be highly unlikely unless I just dedicate my next 5 to 10 years to really kind of grafting out to get there, or making it as a master's, yeah, I just don't really have that kind of same drive for that particular goal right now. And as I said, it's more so the day-to-day that has been kind of getting me with the powerlifting training, right? I've been training for powerlifting specifically for like the last 6 years, since 2019. And I guess at a certain point, and I've never really gotten this before, just get a little bit bored, you know? Well, it's nice hitting heavy numbers and hoisting big loads and, like, you know, people fucking staring at you in the gym, being like, is he really going to lift that? I just don't really kind of have the same enjoyment of actually doing it. So my goal after doing this competition in April 19th is to pivot into bodybuilding for the next few years, right? So if you follow me for any decent time, you will know that I have always had a proclivity towards doing powerlifting and bodybuilding at the same time. Some may call it power building. However, for probably the last year, I've dedicated a lot more of my time specifically towards powerlifting. And that's because I kind of knew something like this would be coming. I competed for the first time in bodybuilding in 2022, and I want to do another season. I said I want to do another season in 2026. Don't think that that's going to happen, purely based off the fact that I'm getting married next year. I'm getting married next year, and then my best man is also getting married like 2-3 months after, which would be kind of during the times when I should probably be in the middle of prep. So prepping for bodybuilding shows while also trying to organize my wedding and do my wedding, you know, probably not the best call if I want to like actually enjoy my wedding. I don't have to worry about checking in with my coach and be like, yeah, the wedding diet didn't go to plan. So that's kind of where my head is at, right? So after this competition, I'll be switching over to bodybuilding for the foreseeable. Don't have any plans as to when it's going to stop, just when the kind of juice runs dry. I guess like once I kind of start to get the itch again to get on the platform. And I kind of like having this little bit of a flow to my training, because I do feel as if they both complement one another. I do feel that the strength I gain from doing powerlifting translates well over to do bodybuilding work. And I feel like a lot of the way you carry yourself as a bodybuilder carries over to powerlifting life, right? So the way that like nutrition is very much dialed in, not that it's not dialed in now for me, but there's going to be a bigger emphasis on trying to keep my body composition at a reasonable level of leanness. There's going to be a huge amount of emphasis put on recovery, and then as well there's going to be more of an emphasis put on hypertrophy training, so building specifically more muscle mass versus spending a lot of my time in strength ranges. So like, say for example, across like the last 2 blocks, especially now in the peak, you know, I have a couple of sessions there during the week, or a couple of slots within the week, where my training is mostly geared towards peaking for strength, or maximizing strength development, or expressing strength, right? So for example, yesterday, squatting in the gym and just doing like a single at a 6 RPE, and then some pause triples at like a 7 RPE, right? As a light day. That's really, really, really easy stuff, right? That's very much skill work. That's not doing anything for kind of building muscle. That's just like a go into the gym, go through the motions, so I can actually show up to my Sunday session feeling fresh, prepared, and ready to hit, you know, my top single for that day with the max amount of preparedness that I can. Then again, other exercises on other days, again, just very low stimulus, more so kind of skill practice, but that could be time where I'm actually spending towards building muscle. However, again, the goal at the time is not to build muscle. The goal at the time is to maximize strength, okay? And I guess like the longer I am training and the more developed I get, and the stronger I get, the more geared towards strength I get, the less emphasis, less time, there is just to dedicate towards hypertrophy training. And with that being a big goal, again, a big goal for me in the future is getting on stage again. Well, I need to dedicate some more time specifically to that. And as well, anybody who does powerlifting training, and it's I guess a meme among powerlifters, sometimes you don't want to do your accessories. I still do my accessories, but you can't say that you have as much juice in you after you've done like a lot of volume on squats, a lot of volume on deadlifts, or a lot of volume on bench, then to go into the likes of your accessories and kind of give everything your all, or even just do a decent volume of accessories or a decent amount of different exercises, because there's only so much mental focus, only so much energy that you can have within actual training session before you just start to tap out. So I do think shifting more to bodybuilding is going to give me that like a little bit of like time, which I need to actually to develop my body more and develop my body more specifically towards that goal, right? Like, of course, if you just decide to do bodybuilding and like you're adding more kind of kilos onto muscle groups that don't contribute to the power lifts, it's not really kind of specific hypertrophy for that goal. But, if I go into bodybuilding now and start to grow my chest more, my delts more, my triceps more, which are definitely areas which I could do, well, then that could potentially in time lead to better strength development in the future. However, I plan to get back on stage at some point in the future, as I mentioned to you. I don't know when it's going to be. I just want to get up on stage when I feel ready. And I guess that was the same kind of thought process I had when I got up on stage in 2022. I think for the first time getting up on stage in 2022, I had pretty decent development for a first timer. I was able to get in really good condition as well for my first season. However, coming into my second season, I want to do better. Okay, I've seen the standard in Ireland right now. The standard in Ireland right now is much better than it was when I competed in 2022, right? I don't know like if I would have placed in the shows I went to last year, right? The NBFI, WMBF, the standard was quite high. I don't know how well I would have done in those lineups. So I want to ensure that I've given myself enough time to make the change that I need to the areas that have been neglected for my powerlifting for the next time I get up on stage. And as well, I want to compete internationally again. Competing internationally was honestly like a dream. So in my first season, I got to go over to the UK DFBA finals, which was in Leicester, I think. I can't remember. Then there was also the European finals, which were in Budapest in Hungary. And then there was also WMBF Worlds, which is in LA, which is fucking deadly. So I want to do all of those shows again. I want to do as many kind of international shows as I can, because that's kind of when you are truly tested, because you're going up against some of the best in the world, some of the best in Europe in terms of like at the amateur level. And it's there when I did my 2022 season, which I was like, oh, these guys are bodybuilders. These guys train for bodybuilding. I'm a powerlifter who's doing bodybuilding. So I need to give myself some dedicated time towards being a bodybuilder. So that's what I'm going to be doing. Okay. If I want to ever, and it is a kind of goal I have, and I'm going to say it here, I do want to get a WMBF Pro card at some point, whether it happens in the next time I get up on stage in terms of the next season or the season after that, It doesn't matter. It's a long-term game at the end of the day. I am only 31, which is young in terms of natural bodybuilding. Then, I need to give myself that time. So that's kind of where the kind of next few years are going to be geared at. And I guess why this is going to be my last powerlifting competition, because ultimately at this stage of my life, I need to give my goals time. I need to give them years before pivoting. And I think this is like a big, big mistake that a lot of people do make when they are trying to pursue a goal, like whether it is body composition development, whether it is strength development. It's flip-flopping between goals too often. And you see, and I guess at the micro level, you see this with people who are constantly going between bulk cut, bulk cut, bulk cut, bulk cut. They can never really pick one direction because they're kind of uncomfortable. They're unwilling to get to the parts of the process where it is uncomfortable. Like, there has been plenty of uncomfortable parts of the process for me in the last couple of years since kind of getting back into powerlifting after my 2022 season. There's been plenty of times where I've had shit training blocks, have had some lifts that have just not budged, have had like annoying niggles, or like been going through annoying sticking periods with like different lifts in regards to even just technique, never mind progression. And it's very easy when those times pop up to just pivot into a different direction and just like, change course. I could have at any point decided I'm going to take up Pyrox now, but you don't. You need to give things time. You need to be patient. You need to be patient through those periods of time where it just doesn't really seem like you're making much headway, right? You just need to keep showing up. And I think that was like one of the big things that I think contributed to me having a really good competition there just before Christmas was that mentality. Just show up. The last year and this year, probably two of the busiest social periods of my life since pre-COVID times, right? I've had many friends get married. I've had lots of stags on. There's been a lot of different, and I've done a lot of travel. Like last year, I think I flew near 40 times. I was on an airplane near 40 times last year, which is insane. And, with all the travel stress, with all the life stress and, all of the alcohol and, all of the partying that I was doing last year, which, I'm not necessarily here to fucking recommend or highlight or tell anybody to do, but it's just a consequence of, my friends get married. I'm going to fucking enjoy that wedding. I'm not going to be thinking about my fitness goals. I'm not going to be thinking about it. And I'm just going to be thinking about enjoying time with my friends. And if that includes getting fucked up, that includes getting fucked up. It's not something I do regularly, but, for special occasions, I'm absolutely going to send it. But with all of that, there was plenty of, blocks that didn't go to plan because, my priorities essentially were elsewhere. There was plenty of times where I, again, as I said, had those lifts which were just not clicking. But the big thing that contributed towards me having a good competition towards back in last year was just I kept showing up, right? Regardless of how I felt, went to the gym, put in my best effort, right? And I didn't let the bad sessions get to me. I didn't let the bad lift get to me. When you hit a single and it moves worse than you expected it to, you hit a set and you overshoot it, or like you miss a rep. Didn't let those get to me. I just said, okay, cool. That's just something for me to kind of compartmentalize to now, move on to my next exercise, move on to the next set, and make that one that little bit better. And that's been one thing that I've been very, very much practicing across these last few months. So since the first podcast of the year, I had a stag at the end of January and I had a stag at the end of February. So 2 back to back, literally like 3 weeks between them. Yeah, look, they like if anything, they're going to be times where it's going to be a little bit harder to progress around them because a lot of alcohol is involved, right? And I know you can say, "Oh, well, Shane, you don't have to drink." It's like, okay, well, it's not an option for me. It's my friend's side, so I'm gonna enjoy them as much as I can. But the important thing is that I enjoy the weekends. Once the weekend is over, I'm back to the gym on Tuesday. That's when my training week starts, and I'm back in. And before I go, try to get my important stuff done. So prior to the first snag, made sure to get all my squats in, my squat, bench, and deadlift. Made sure to get on all the competition lifts. Did the exact same thing when I went to the one at the end of February. No matter how I felt on the Tuesday, because I would have got home on the Sunday evening, and Monday would have been just check-ins, which it always is. No matter how shit I still felt on the Tuesday, I was back into the gym. Okay, and on that day when I came into the gym, no expectations, warm up as you usually do, and what you load for your top set, that's dictated by how the last warm up felt. And for the most part, because I was able to bounce back quite quickly and compartmentalize those events, it just meant that I was able to have better training sessions. And this is one thing that I say to my clients all the time, right? If you have events on, you have weekends that, you're a little bit looser, whether it's with alcohol, whether that's with food or something like that, whatever it is, if you feel like you're deviating from your plan or deviating from what you should be doing, the important thing is to put it in quarantine, right? That's it there. That's the event done. Now you move on, okay? Because it's not about what has happened in the past. It's about what you can do right now to help propel you forward. And when you can tap into that mindset, it allows you to be a lot more process oriented. And I think that's a big, big thing that has allowed me to continue to making successful strides across the last few months. So in both the first block of the year, hit some nice PBs on squat and deadlift. last block, bench has been on sleepy mode for like the last year, so don't ask about that. But second block of the year, again, squat 265 for 3, which is a 5 kilo PB in reps, and a move way better than 260 did the previous year. I hit 280 for 3 on deadlift 2. So again, 2 big PBs, like 2 top end PBs. And now coming into this peak, I feel as if I've got some really, really good momentum coming into it. I've got absolutely no interruptions until competition to be able to kind of showcase my best. And I think because I've had to manage some of these occasions, it's been allowed me to just follow the plan. All right, follow the plan. I'm not having any big expectations. If anything, my expectations are lower because I know that those events can offset some of my performance, offset some of my recovery. So I'm just coming into the gym, going through my warm-ups as I mentioned, going to my familiar last warm-up, and I think everybody should have that last warm-up being like roughly a similar weight week to week. I know, of course, you're going to maybe increase it as your top set gets heavier, but it's going to be something that you've hit many, many times before. But that is always going to be the thing that's going to dictate, okay, what should I go for my top set? And there has been some occasions across the last few months where I've had to take that load down based off what I hit the previous week because of how my recovery was. But because I was able to make that decision, I felt better and felt more productive by making that decision versus being stubborn and said, okay, I need to increase the load because I lifted less last week. I need to lift more this week. So it has allowed to kind of stimulate better decision making in the actual prep process. And as a result, I've been able to have sustained results. Having huge expectations for a session and having huge expectations for a competition more often than not has worked against me. And I'm sure there's plenty of people who are maybe listening to this who could beat powerlifting, can relate. You know, whether that's you're on the look up to a meet and you take out your dots calculator and you're like, okay, well, if I hit this weight, if I hit this weight on squats, this weight on bench, this weight on deadlift at this body weight, then I'm going to get 500 dots, right? I'm sure we've all done it. When it does come to weight cuts, for example, and definitely guilty of this, it's like, okay, if I manage to drop 8% of my body weight, I'll get this. And then as well, you also pair that against the kind of outlandish total that you set for yourself. And quite often what this does is it actually, like, and definitely for me, it detracts from the process, right? Because I then feel like I need to be hitting certain weights in certain sessions or else it's not a success. Versus lifting as heavy as I can relative to what's prescribed by my program and having that to be the success, you know? And generally when you focus on the latter versus the former, where you're almost pre-planning in loads that you need to be hitting, it does allow for, again, better satisfaction during the session, but as well, better confidence. Because you're not coming into the session like feeding on edge because you need to hit a certain load, right? You're going into the session and you're, again, going through warm-ups and loading the weight that you know you can hit for that target RPE. And yet, while you might still have a little bit of anxiety for that number, a little bit of fear, a little bit unhealthy, like not unhealthy, a bit of healthy nerves, well, then at least you know it's something that you are going to be able to actually achieve for that day and will be kind of a stepping stone for where you're going to be the following week, right? Because that's a big thing with peaking, right? You need to kind of start with the end in mind, right? You are not here to lift the heaviest every single week. You're here to build yourself up to lifting the heaviest in competition. And I think this is like one of the kind of thing that kind of comes alongside with like having like overly large expectations with having like this kind of like pre-planned progression in mind, is that sometimes you are, or even if it's just like it's just an immature kind of way of kind of looking at the peaking process, it can sometimes look like for some people where they are just trying to kind of lift as heavy as they can every single week. And again, if they're looking for a big kind of number on that day, they could be actually kind of lifting far too heavy too early on the peak. And what ends up happening is by the time they get to their final few weeks, they are crushed. You know, they're crushed either from the intensity perspective, they're hardly able to get through back downs, they're grinding at reps, picking up niggles. And, you know, as you start to kind of pick up all those type of things, you start grinding reps too early in prep, you start to pick up niggles. Well, that's that has to be pulled back so that you can actually perform in a day. And more often than not, when I start to see this too early on in the prep, it typically means that somebody's not going to have a great competition. And I've had competitions like that myself, where I've been, again, setting too big expectations, leading into the meet. I need to hit this on this week, and all of a sudden, you start missing reps. Like during prep, you start grinding out benches and stuff like that, and it just never results in having a good competition day, because that also affects your confidence. And if you are able to kind of come onto a meet day, and you've missed no lifts during prep, you've kind of executed every one of them to what's prescribed in the plan, you're going to be able to come in as a confident athlete. Because you miss some reps during prep, you grind life out of some lifts, that's going to eat away at you until you get to competition day. And even when you get onto the platform and you reload that weight, you're going to be in your head until you kind of get underneath the bar and squat or bench it or deadlift, whatever it is. So for me, for this competition, what are my expectations? My expectations are just to do better than I did last year. That's it. I did 737 last year. I think my dots are 463, and my goal this competition is to do better. My goal is to have fun. It is going to be my last powerlift competition for a long time, as I mentioned, and it's going to be the strongest flight that I'll be in. There's going to be guys there who are over 500 dots, and I've got lowly 460, so I'm not having any expectation to podium. I just want to be the best that I can be on that day. And I know that sounds very like, yeah, you definitely have goals in mind. Yeah, and like if there's one goal I have in mind, right, it's like I would like to squat 300, right? But I don't have any goals for bench or deadlift. Like wherever they are, they are. And I think actually because I have that kind of mindset around those lifts, that again, this prep is just being on very, very smoothly of making good decisions. And I'm going to continue making good decisions going forward, especially because this is my 10th powerlifting prep. So I have all that experience behind me to know what is going to be a good decision and what's a good approach to actually kind of yield to a more successful competition. And I'm kind of talking through all this right now in regards to, start with the end in mind, and don't like set massive expectations. Don't pre-plan in these numbers, kind of take what's there on the day in regards to your training sessions, because I've made all those mistakes before. And the competitions, like the one that I did previous to Christmas, and even the competition I did this time last year, I had this same mentality, right? Just kind of being very, very process oriented and just doing my best by that training session that was turning up to that day. And as a result, good competitions. So good, smooth, enjoyable competitions. And there was very little kind of crying involved. previous, not that I cried in previous competitions. I'd have a good competition objectively on paper, set some PBs, and all of a sudden, because I didn't hit my high expectations, well then all of a sudden it wasn't a great competition, and that's not an enjoyable place to be. That's not a good place to be, right? If you hit a PB at all on the platform, that's something worth celebrating. So a big change that I've actually made to my training for this prep is that I am not going to be uploading anything for YouTube, or at least I don't plan on it for now, for sure. Because I feel like when I was doing my December open prep, when I was doing the likes of my ab series prep last year, and even the comp prep before that, I was recording lots of bits and bobs and trying to make like a series out of the actual training and make it like a series out of the prep. But it took away from my training, if I'm being completely honest, right? One thing that's really, really important to me in training is getting into a flow state. So that type of like mindset where you're not thinking about anything else other than what you're doing in that exact moment. You're just completely absorbed in that present moment. You're completely in the activity that you're doing, right? And when I am setting up a camera to record different angles, thinking about different things to kind of say to the camera while I'm during the session, number one, it adds a lot of time to the session. And then two, it takes me out of that zone, right? It's harder for myself to get amped up. And number three, it's easier to make bad decisions because I'm putting this out on the internet. And while like 250s or whatever numbers could just be deemed to be, impressive by whoever, because it's all relative, you like in your mind, you're like, oh, well, if I do another 5 kilos here, it'd be even cooler, whereas like it has no bearing on what what other people are going to think is impressive, but it could be the decision that actually kind of sets me in the back foot, right? And then all of a sudden, because maybe I've had a crappy session or a crappy single or whatever it may be, or then as a result you start to feel bad because you're like, oh, well, I have to put this out to the world now, and they're going to see my failure, which, like, there's no issue with people seeing your failure, because again, at the end of the day, that happens to everybody, and it's important to actually kind of highlight some shortcomings and some failures too, because it kind of makes things a little bit more relatable and a bit more authentic than just being like, I'm winning all the time. However, for me, it was the big thing was just that the fact that actually recording is just taking me out of a flow state. So that's what I'm doing at this time around, is I'm doing my best throughout the sessions just to lock in, brother. So getting myself a good playlist on. Typically when I am training, I will 9 times out of 10 pick a mix to listen to. And the reason I do this is because if I listen to a mix, I do not have to change music at all during session. I'll just pick a DJ that I like. I usually go onto like an essential mix or something like that, BBC Radio 1. If you want a good selection of essential mixes, just hit me up, because there's a guy I follow on SoundCloud who has every year collated, and it's actually amazing. His SoundCloud is probably the best thing I've ever found. As somebody who really enjoys their tunes. But I put on a playlist or put on a mix like that, put the earphones in, and I just get involved, right? There's no looking at my phone. I set my phone up maybe to record myself, to send over to my coach, and just to record the actual the lift itself, because at the end of the day, I'm still going to post some of the lifts to Instagram, because it's important to document some of the process. In my opinion, just won't be setting up a camera and kind of changing angle all the time to make it more cinematic for the likes of YouTube. But being able to do that has been allowing me to, again, be more present, be more engaged with my session, be more purposeful, get myself with the right frame of mind. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, like, powerlifting is a game of getting yourself close to that, like, that peak intensity, right? Like, especially now, like in the peak, the hint is in the name. I am going to be working up towards something that's going to be, within striking distance to a 1 rep max. That's challenging. That's scary. That requires focus. And you can't just be going between one task to another, going from being a fucking director to being an athlete, and expecting to be having a good performance in the same session. Or at least I can't. I've kind of figured that I just can't do that level of task switching. I can't get myself into the zone that quickly. So that's one big thing that I've been focusing on, is just, again, just trying to give myself that space to be an athlete, because ultimately it is my last powerlifting competition. Yeah, would it be great to have it all kind of filmed and everything like that for my YouTube? It would be great, but for me right now, I'd rather make this prep. For me, I'd rather make these training sessions as good as I can from an athlete point of view, versus like being like a content creator or something. Okay, again, that's not my priority for now. My priority is to show up on April 19th and do my best ever, so I can look back on this competition and be like, yeah, I went out the way I wanted to, and I put everything into that prep. I also feel, because of the nature of the sessions, right, with the using knee wraps, it almost doesn't lend itself that well to filming yourself when you are doing these sessions, because the sessions take long enough as they are. Last year, when I was prepping for this competition, I would get to the gym for 11 a.m. and I wouldn't get out of the gym till literally 2 or 3 p.m., which is an insane amount of time to spend in the gym. Some days I was there until 4. And that was a combination of using both the knee wraps as well as filming myself, right? So for those who are unaware, when it does come to knee wraps versus knee sleeves, so knee sleeves, they are like typically a neoprene material. You slide them up over your calf onto your knee, and they add a bit of compression, a bit of warmth to the joint. It makes it, like, in my opinion, easier to warm up, right? It's easier to get into the bottom of the squat, at least for my knees. And I find for sure that it does add kilos to my lifts, right? Just for the fact that out of the bottom position, you get a tiny bit of an extra spring. There's that little bit of extra compression at the hamstring to calf, and it feels nicer in the bottom position, right? It feels more comfortable. You feel like you could drop into the bottom position with a little bit more kind of force relative to when you don't have it. Or you could still do it without the knee sleeve, but it just may not feel as good. So they're typically there more so to add compression to the joint and to help kind of warm up the actual knee itself. Knee wraps, however, they are typically made out of a harder material. They are typically made out of something that is like canvas-like material. They can be quite long, so they can be 2 meters to 2.5 meters. And when you are using them, you have to essentially apply them separately to each set. Okay, so you can't put them on and leave them on for the entire session. If you do, they're probably not wrapped tight enough to really kind of give much of a benefit, or likely to need your leg amputated at the end of the session because you should have lost all feeling in your leg, right? So because the material is so thick and so hard, when you're wrapping around your knee, you're essentially starting to form like a cast between your lower leg to your upper leg, right? You're trying to make that knee joint as rigid as possible. Now, with this, there is a few steps to the wrapping process, right? So there's the actual wrap, and then there's also the rolling of the wrap. So last year when I was prepping, I didn't have a wrap roller. So I'd have to wrap my knee, okay, wrap both knees. And last year when I was really just learning how to wrap my knees, it took a long time to actually going to get the rhythm of it down and to get the technique down. Because there is a knack to it. It's not simple. It's not like, they're not like Velcro. You have to kind of tie the wraps off essentially in a specific way, while you're also having your other leg feel as if it's about to fall off because of how tight the other wrap is. But once they're done, you take them off and they become all loose and everything like that, you have to roll them up again, so it's easier to apply them for the next set. Now, this takes a considerable time and a considerable effort, as well as considerable forearm endurance. So when you're wrapping them by hand, again, like there's many times last year where I'd be middle of wrapping and my forearms get so tired, let go accidentally of the wrap, and then it would just completely unravel, which naturally enough would take a lot more time to the session. Whereas this time around, I know exactly how to tie wraps, which is taking a little bit less time off the sessions. And I have recently acquired a wrap roller. Thank you to Serban Baki. Great guy. Sent the wrap roller all the way from Norway to Spain. So very grateful for that, because they've definitely started to save me a lot of time. However, with both of these processes here, it's very difficult to kind of remain in a flow state when you are doing both of these processes, as well as, again, trying to stay in that mental state to prep. Because once you apply the wraps, from my experience at least, you start to get into like a fight or flight response, right? Because the discomfort is so high. You have to imagine these things if you've never used them, right? You're essentially putting on like a cast, but it's extremely tight, right? You're wrapping this material so hard around the back of your knee and around the back of your hamstring that it's essentially like crushing the tendons and crushing the ligaments that are there, right? All the connective tissue, like muscle as well. Like even when you are applying the wrap, you are best off to kind of pull your toe towards you and to contract your quad, because that's going to have both the gastroc, one of the heads of the calves, as well as your actual quad muscle. You're going to have them tensioned, so it's less likely that the wrap is going to compress on these when they're really loose, which can cause some kind of muscle strains, right? Last year I felt, when I didn't do this on one of the sessions by accident, that I almost tore my calf. It was incredibly painful to walk for a couple of days. And even still, when you are applying the wraps, you're going to be left with a couple of bruises. Like, I've got loads of bruises on the back of my legs at the moment, just from the wraps being so tight. And as you go down into the bottom position, well, naturally what happens is that as that cast starts to bind up, it starts to put more and more compression on the back of the knee, which is why wraps work so well. Typically wraps can add about 20 kilos or so to your squat. For this reason, they can be a little bit of a challenge to kind of get used to, because there is a unique way that you need to squat relative to the knee sleeves, or at least it's less inviting to hit depth, right? Because of how painful it can be when you wrap the wraps quite tight. So definitely not for the faint-hearted, and definitely something that you do need to give yourself time. So for this prep, I've had 2 blocks leading into me where I have been using wraps. About 2, number 1, get a feel again after a year off of using reps for, number one, how to hit depth, what type of tightness I should be using on each squat. So you can apply different levels of tightness as you do more revolutions, or just like don't like pull or crank on the rep as tight when you're kind of going through, your first warm up, second warm up, third warm up, all that kind of stuff, and trying to put it on as tight as possible for the heaviest ones, but trying to get into that rhythm. But then as well, again, just like getting used to the actual squatting technique, right? Because for some people, when they are doing squatting sleeves, for example, you'll see a variety of different kind of techniques. You'll see people who are, kind of slow and controlled into the hole, and then you'll see people who dive bomb and use a lot of momentum to come out of the hole, right? When it does come to and as well, you're going to see people who have a more of a kind of posterior dominant type squat, right, where they're using a lot of hip flexion, minimal knee flexion, and you have people who are quite upright who are going to have a lot of knee flexion and more of an upright torso. With the knee wraps, because the benefit is going to be around your, it's like the benefit of the wrap is going to be providing a lot of strength through knee flexion. You kind of need to bias into knee flexion, and that means that you also need to kind of bias into the wrap, right? If you have this like really taut, rigid material, it's easier to snap down into the wrap and rebound out versus gradually build into the wrap and then kind of pop out, right? So kind of, and to be honest, actually varying degrees work for different people. I know some people like to have that more kind of slow control, drive knees forward into it, like the likes of Dave Richardson, for example, works really well for him. But for a lot of people, they're going to find it a little bit easier if they go down a little bit faster, drive those knees forward into the knee wraps aggressively, and then spring out. However, naturally, the faster you go, there also is going to be less, there can be more of consideration for kind of losing position or tightness if you do not have your brace kind of set up, because you can easily hit the hole too hard and have your hips then start to shoot backwards, knees extend too early, and you're not able to keep yourself underneath the bar, and then all of a sudden the bar rolls over the back of your neck. So it's one of those things that, again, it takes a long time to get used to. If you're ever going to prep in reps, I'd absolutely recommend giving yourself as long as you can. I would definitely try to do 2 blocks in reps, if not 3, and ensure that you do have like some experienced spotters around you. I was very, very lucky last year to have a decent amount of spotters training around me and like keeping me safe when I was doing reps, because last year I was actually too nervous to squat alone without reps. Whereas like now I don't really have an option because I don't have people in the gym, but I've been able to make do. I've just, again, kind of benefited from what I mentioned earlier in regards to not having big expectations and just loading the weight that seems right for me for that day. And as a result of kind of not doing anything too stupid or not being too kind of bullheadish, I've been able to, again, get confident in reps, confident in my ability, and just kind of see it as if it's a normal training day. So, but if it's your first time, absolutely make sure you have spotters there, because it's a lot easier for a squat to go wrong in knee wraps versus sleeves, especially for the fact that your knee can snap back into extension quite early, and you can be left with like your hips still very much at the back of the room. And it can be quite scary when that happens too, because it's not as if when you kind of miss a squat with knee wraps, you can just like just kind of jump out from underneath it, because sometimes the wraps can be so like taut and rigid on the like your legs, it's almost like hard to kind of move out of position. But I've seen some pretty bad accidents happen with them too. So it's definitely something that you do need to have a bit of kind of safety precautions around. So for this competition, it is going to be based off dots, right? So dots essentially is just a coefficient for your strength to body weight ratio, and the AB series does different, I guess, scoring systems for different competitions or for different divisions, right? So you have the Clash of Titans, which is going to be the main card for this competition, and that's invite only. The majority of guys who are there are going to have like 1,000 kilo total. I believe the invite requirement is going to be 900 or 950 or so in regards to the minimum total that you can have to kind of enter into the competition or be invited to enter. And then below that, then you have the likes of the Pro-Am, Division 1, Division 2, in their other kind of main event or main competition, which is the ABS Pro, that's usually in August. That's also dots based for the kind of the more elite guys, right? So that's 500 dots or more. It could have went up a little bit because like they've been having guys like having 600 plus dots recently, which is actually insane. But because it's dots based, and because essentially you can score higher based off what your total is relative to your body weight, and it is a 24-hour weigh-in period, it does allow for kind of harsher weight cuts, or gives a little bit more incentive to weight cut. Okay, now because there's no weight category, you don't have to be any certain weight. You just have to be the weight that I guess that you want to be, or you aim to be, for the kind of total you want, or kind of dots that you want. Now, if you are competing for a podium position, this can be the difference between placing first or placing second, depending on whether you do weight cut or you don't do weight cut, or even the amount of percentage that you drop. However, again, you don't need to do that. And I do think for people who are maybe Division 1, Division 2, probably not a massive need to be doing any type of weight cut, unless, again, you're Division 1, you're looking to maybe kind of get yourself into the Pro-Am. But if you're just after getting into Division 1, or you're even in Division 2, probably not much of a need, right? Especially because Division 2 is typically going to be people who are in their early years of powerlifting. They're only really they're only really kind of building up towards getting into the Division 1. You know, it could be their first few competitions, and for them, really, in my opinion, their goal is just to get strong. You know, don't throw in any extra variables that could take away from your competition or impact your performance on that day. And throwing in a weight cut is definitely a big one that can do that. So Division 2 is going to be anybody who's below 400 dots. Division 1 is going to be anybody between 400 to 460 or 459. And then Pro-Am is going to be 460 and more. So that's going to be the division I'm in. For this competition, and I did it for last year too, I will be doing a weight cut. Now, I'm not going to be fighting for podium position. And you're like, Shane, why are you just contradicting yourself? You just said there's no point doing weight cut unless you're going to be going for podium position, or, in my opinion as well, unless you're going to be working towards some big type of dots PB. But I'm still going to be doing it. I don't have any big dots PB to be hitting. I am not going to be getting to podium position. There's going to be guys that I'm going to be competing against that have, you know, dots scores that are like 60, 70 ahead of mine. But I still want to do it anyway. And why I want to do it is because I coach a lot of people through weight cuts too. And I think it's important for me as a coach to not just understand the theory behind doing weight cuts, the methods to employ, but also to have done them myself, to kind of troubleshoot my own scenario, as well as to just experience it, right? It's one thing to tell somebody how they could potentially feel when they do water load, or they do water cut, or they cut sodium or whatever, or after they do sauna. And there's another thing to have actually like tacit information on what that feels like, you know, to be able to relate to the other person. So last week I tried a weight cut with my coach, Melissa. So Melissa was on the podcast a couple of episodes ago. Go listen to that if you haven't listened to it. So we were looking to try the weight cut, see if we could make any improvements based off the weight cut that we did last year. We cut into abs series, was it 16 now? But this competition last year. And I think we got off about 3% or so, just about 3%. And that week we did a water load, we did a water cut, we manipulated my food volumes, we did a gut cut, and we did sauna. Now, with all those methods employed, you would kind of expect maybe 5, 6 or more percent. However, I did make 1 or 2 errors that time round. For that weight cut, I did make a mistake with my sodium levels, okay? So to kind of give you a kind of an idea as to, you know, how weight cuts work. So when we're looking at acute weight cuts or rapid weight cuts, so weight cuts that are taking place on the week of the competition, you're not looking to change body fat stores, all right? You're looking to lose weight from other compartments of the body. So typically what that's going to look like is you're going to try to lose water weight that's held intramuscularly. So, you know, when you are storing carbohydrates, for example, carbohydrates typically will carry some water, and that, as a result, can make you weigh heavier. If you drop water, you're going to start to reduce glycogen stores, not reduce glycogen stores, but a combination of dropping water is going to have the muscle volume decrease because there is a decent amount of water kind of in the actual muscle itself. Then to pull glycogen out, which again is going to be a process of reducing some carbohydrates. Both of those two things there can decrease weight substantially. So by dropping the likes of glycogen or glycogen stores, you could lose anywhere between up to 1 to 2% of your body weight, but that depends on how low that you bring your carbohydrates down. Then if you pull out water and you do water cut, you can typically reduce your body's weight by about 2 to 4%. Now, how a lot of people go about doing some type of water drop is they will do some type of water load and a water cut. So what that looks like is you will work your water intake up from your usual amount of water intake per day all the way up to maybe 2 to 2.5 times of your usual intake. Or another recommendation is up to 75 mils per kilogram body weight or 100 mils per kilogram of body weight. So you'll do that for anywhere between 3 to 5 days. Now, as you do that load, when you come into the final day, you will then drop your water down to about a quarter of what your usual water intake is, or down to about 15 mils per kilogram of body weight. Okay, so there's different ways to do it. Now, as you do this, right, as you do that cut, essentially what's meant to happen is when you're doing the water load in the earlier portion of the week, because you are increasing so much water volume inside you, your body naturally will start to try to maintain homeostasis by having you urinate more, okay? Because it doesn't want the level of water in your system to surpass the level of sodium that you have in your blood, because that can become dangerous, because you can put yourself at risk of hyponatremia, which is really carries some serious hazards for like neurological issues, and issues with your kidneys as well. Okay, so when you're doing this water load, you continually urinate, right? You're literally pissing like up to 20-30 times a day. And when you do the water cut, what's meant to happen is you're meant to, quote unquote, have tricked your body. Okay, so the system that is essentially regulating your fluid balance is the renin-aldosterone system. So you have the likes of aldosterone and ADH, which is antidiuretic hormone. So these two guys here are trying to help to regulate the amount of fluid that we're holding onto, or the amount of fluid that we are flushing out. So as we increase the amount of water that we're having, these two hormones will start to decrease, okay? Because these are trying to help us to retain some fluid. So as these two hormones decrease, our body's going to continue flushing out fluids and continue pissing out water, okay? And this is meant to continue during the weight cut day. So even despite reducing your fluid down substantially, you should still have an output in fluids, okay? At like a relatively similar frequency or volume that you did when you're actually loading. Now, a big player into this process too, well, number one is, well, how adaptable that system is, right? There's definitely going to be variability there between person to person, how quickly that system kicks back in to stop that fluid output. But then there's also going to be the likes of sodium too, okay? So you might have heard a saying where sodium goes, water will follow, okay? And you may have noticed this if you have like a big pizza. If you have a big pizza, you'll notice that like when you start to drink fluids, you hold on to them. You start to get all puffy, and you look like you're retaining water. Okay, or in the other context, when you are severely dehydrated after a night drinking, and then you start to drink that day, the next day you wake up and you almost feel as if you're retaining far more water than you usually would. Right, you look a lot more puffy, and this is because well, I guess that's a different scenario. I was talking about the pizza there, wasn't I, with salt, but we can come back to that part. But with the salt, right? Salt is going to follow that water, okay? Because it wants to try to retain water, okay? To maintain the balance of the ratio of water to sodium within the blood, because it doesn't want this to kind of get too out of control. So when you are going through a water load, you're trying to maintain your sodium levels, right? You want to keep your sodium levels relatively constant, and then maybe some days out from the competition, maybe 1 to 2 days out from the competition, alongside maybe the water cut, you will drop the sodium levels, okay? Because again, if you have a high sodium level on the water cut day, for example, well then that may cause some extra water retention, okay? Because your body will notice that, okay, the fluid is starting to go down, sodium's still here, so we're going to start pull more water into the cells and kind of hold on to it. But by cutting out the sodium, you should continue to see this kind of excretion of fluids. Now, what I did the last time when I did my cut for ab series is that I did the water load, but with the change of foods throughout the week, when I do the gut cut portion, which I'll talk about in a second, a lot of the foods were low sodium, right? They didn't have a ton of sodium in them relative to the foods I usually would. And then I didn't also account for the salt that I added to all my meals. So I salt pretty much all my meals. Probably have too much salt, than I probably have more salt than I really should be having. And as a result of making those switches, right? So middle of the week, I pretty much went for low sodium food and dropped all the sodium that I was pretty much having. I dropped it too early. So as a result, I pretty much flushed out all my fluids middle of the week. And then even when I got to like the end of the week and I was doing like the water cut and I was doing sauna, I barely lost any weight because I pretty much had kind of got my body to a position where it was able to regulate my fluid balance relative to the sodium intake. And as a result, I didn't really lose that much weight for that competition. So I had 3% down when I should have lost probably up to 5 to 6%, or at least that's what my theory is. Okay. Now, or my theory on how much I should have lost. Now, the gut cut portion, as I mentioned there, is essentially to lower your food volume. Okay, so very, very simple way of kind of thinking about this, and is that, you know, the food you eat on a day-to-day basis is going to have a certain level of volume it takes up in your stomach. That volume weighs something, and then you throw in the likes of fruits and vegetables or high fiber intake. Hopefully that you do. It works better if you do have a high fiber intake or high fruit and vegetable intake. But if you have a large amount of food residue in your gut, essentially poop, that is causing some of the weight that you see every morning on the weighing scales. Now, if you do a gut cut, where essentially you're adding in very energy dense sources of food, so we're talking about like high fat cuts of meat, cheese, cream, cream, like oils, things like ice cream could be added there, chocolate, for example, you know, things that you probably wouldn't say, oh, that's a helpful food. You can add in a lot more hyperpalatable, energy dense foods, but also keeping an eye on the sodium, like I mentioned, to essentially keep your calories where they are, right? So the aim for the gut cut is to reduce the overall volume of the food, but keep your calories pretty much equivalent. Now, what typically happens with this too is that as you make the switches to more kind of low volume foods, is that you will start to have a switch in carbohydrate to fat ratio, because naturally enough, carbohydrates have a higher food volume relative to fats. Fats are more energy dense, they're 9 calories per gram. So what generally happens during this gut cut is that your fat intake goes up, carbohydrate intake goes down. As carbohydrate intake goes down too, you also start to shift some glycogen and some weight that way, some water weight too. And then naturally enough, because the food volume is more compact, you can end up losing more body weight by losing gut residue, right? So you start to kind of clear all the poop out. You're essentially just during this kind of period, maybe having like less than 15 grams of fiber per day too. Hopefully you have more than 15 grams of fiber per day. If you don't have more than 15 grams of fiber per day, I can't imagine that this is going to work too well for you. But through doing that, through dropping carbohydrates, increasing fat, increasing energy density, dropping food volume, dropping all the kind of residue at your gut, this can have your body weight drop by about 1 to 2%. And again, as I mentioned, if you are already following a diet that is quite energy dense and you're not having a huge amount of food volume, using like a lot of like hyper processed food, you're not having much fruit and vegetables, this probably isn't going to method that's going to work too well for you. So what I did last year when I was doing this gut cut is, again, as I said, I kind of picked a lot of foods that were quite low sodium, wasn't adding sodium to them, and as a result, I was losing some of that like residue out of my stomach, and my food volume was quite low. I lost weight by that method, but again, because of the sodium, we do think that I could have done that a little bit better. So this time, I was trying to correct my wrongs. Okay, so went for try my weight cut there last week, and some people don't believe me, or some people find it hard to believe, but I did a water load, and with the water load, we got my fluids up to 18 liters per day, right? I typically will drink about 7 to 8 liters a day anyway, so it was about 2 times or 2.5 times the amount of water that I'd be drinking. So 18 liters of water for, I believe, it was 4 days, and then we did 1 day of a water cut, where I was drinking about 1.5 liters. Alongside that, 2 days of sodium restriction. Alongside that, a gut cut. Alongside that, sauna. Okay, so all these methods combined, I really should be kind of dropping again up to 5 to 6%, if not a little bit more. With the sauna, the kind of protocol was to get into the sauna, the night before, doing a weigh-in, and sitting there for 10 minutes, 5-minute break, towel off, get all the kind of excess sweat off me, and repeat that until I kind of reached up to 60 minutes total time in the sauna. Now, barely sweat when I went in and did that sauna. It took me probably up to my third round before I really started to like noticeably sweat. So, I was in there for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and barely any sweating. This is a really big sign of like, oh, your body's holding onto some fluid, or you're really, really dehydrated. And this is on the water cut portion of the day, okay? And even on that day, despite having those 18 liters of fluid leading into that day, I barely went to the bathroom, right? So again, what typically meant to happen on a water cut day is you're meant to continue urinating. And that day, I barely went to the bathroom. I think I went to the bathroom maybe like 3 or 4 times. And even at then, it was like dribbles. Don't want to put too much imagery into your head. However, this time around, I was being very cognizant of my sodium intake. So Emma and myself, we have a drug dealer scale for managing sodium when she's doing her bodybuilding prep like she is doing now. So one of those ones that it will track like half grams and stuff like that, right? So we were taking I was taking stock of that. Every single meal that was adding salt, I was like weighing that, keeping track of it, and keeping tabs of numbers. And from the very first day of the weight cut to the last day of the weight cut, ensuring that everything was kind of like ticked off in that regard, and tracking the sodium very, very closely. Now, something that I do think I could have done better, and these are some things that I think that we could have done better too for the weight cut, is I think I could have cut more sodium on the 2 days, and I think I could have cut more carbs. So my sodium intake is naturally quite high, and this is like even my typical intake from foods comes to about 4,900 milligrams per day, and then on top of that, I'm adding on more pretty much per meal. So I'm adding on extra salt. So my salt intake is probably too high, and my blood pressure is actually in a good spot, believe it or not. So I'm obviously not as sensitive to salt intake influencing my blood pressure, so that's okay. However, what I did when I did my sodium cut was I dropped sodium to just food sources on the first day, which meant I had no added salt. So I wasn't kind of using the salt grinder at all, and just having the salt from the foods I have. Now, the second day, I cut my sodium that little bit more. So typically, when I have my rice and I cook my rice in a rice cooker, I use stock cubes. Stock cubes, naturally enough, they're riddled with salt. So I changed my rice for the second day, and I cut my sodium in half yet again. So I do think that if I did that for the 2 days or even up to 3 days, it might have had a little bit more of a beneficial effect. I'd say 2 days would have actually done quite well, or I assume so. However, from everything that I've read, if you cut sodium for more than 2 days, it doesn't seem to have as much of a beneficial impact in regards to losing further body water. And I guess this is also kind of my experience with doing the weight cut last year, when I clearly dropped my sodium too early. The next thing is carbohydrates. My carbohydrates, as a result of my calorie intake being quite high, were still quite high. So my calorie intake at the moment is 4,500, and I'm having about 600 to 650 grams of carbohydrates per day. And we only really dropped my carbohydrates down to like mid 400s, right? I followed the plan to the letter, as I had it laid out for me really, really, really nicely by Melissa, and I wanted to just like put my full kind of trust in that, rather than doing too much of my own kind of tweaks to it. The sodium kind of tweak there was my own, so I'll take kind of complete blame for that one. But I do think we could definitely reduce carbohydrates further, and something that we've talked about since my last check-in. So my carbohydrates, as I mentioned, were up to 450. I do think we could definitely reduce it down to sub 200 or even lower. It's just at the level of calories that I need to kind of support my energy intake. If you're having 4,500 calories and you're doing minimal carbohydrates, that is going to be a lot of unpleasant eating, a lot of unpleasant foods. So that's something I'm going to have to just kind of suck it up and kind of grit my teeth and bear when it does come to doing the weight cut for the next competition. But that's something we could definitely do better, because 450 grams of carbohydrates is still liable to carry a decent amount of water weight, a decent amount of glycogen within my muscles. It's definitely not a glycogen depleting diet. And as a result, I'd say that probably costs us maybe a couple of percent. So combining all these things here, right? So the gut cut portion was pretty handy in regards to the actual food sources. We just kind of kept to similar food sources I usually would use, except for we increased the fat content quite considerably. Fats are over 200 grams per day. More kind of oil, lots of oils, lots of like egg yolk. There was also a lot of peanut butter, smooth peanut butter, and there was also a lot of just regular butter too. And then with all of these factors combined, the 18-liter water load, the water cut, the sodium cut, the sauna, the gut cut, I lost about 3%, just under 3%, 2.7%, right? Which is actually lower than what I lost the previous year. And it's funny because looking through past weight cuts, I haven't actually been able to break the 3% mark at all, which is really interesting. And from talking to Melissa, she was also kind of talking about unique experiences that other athletes that she coaches had where they could barely kind of break that mark too. And even from talking to other people in my DMs who kind of messaged me after kind of putting up a story about it, they were kind of voicing the exact same. Now, obviously there's going to be there's many different factors here at play, right? There's many different kind of variables that we're playing around with in regards to protocols, the water, the gut cut, carbohydrate level, the likes of the sodium, the sauna, the stress that the heat can induce on the body, and then just the psychological stress of like expectation. But I guess there's going to be definitely things that are kind of playing into this in regards to like our own unique physiology, which I don't understand too much about in regards to like individual responses. I'd love to learn more about it. So maybe that's something that I need to get an expert on for this. But we still do think that there are things that we do better for the upcoming cut leading into this competition. So big things that we are going to be looking at adjusting, as I mentioned, carbohydrate level. I can definitely get that down to sub 200. I definitely do think as well that I can cut sodium for longer, or at least cut it down harder for the 2 days versus having a kind of gradual dip down till the last day. I can definitely do that better. And I definitely do think that we could probably do a little bit more in the sauna. You know, I definitely felt okay kind of leaving the sauna. And even though, and because it's 24-hour weigh-in, I can, run the risk of staying in just that little bit more. And even like, going in, maybe wearing some clothes that will maybe kind of get a little bit more kind of sweat out of me. So there's some things that we're going to be looking at doing to kind of help me kind of experience a little bit more kind of depth before I get into this competition prep and get into the actual kind of competition day. But ultimately, when it does come to these weight cuts, and it's one thing to just keep in mind, is that like your ability to kind of do all these weight cutting protocols is going to be very much dictated by the weigh-in period. So like if you're doing a 2-hour weigh-in period, throwing the kitchen sink at these, especially if you're like, close to your weight cap. If you're within 3% of your weight cap, right? Most people won't need to do all these protocols. Like most people could do a gut cut and just do a small manipulation of carbohydrates and fats and make their weight class, or at least you should. If you are above 3% your weight class long term, you're really putting yourself at risk of having to do some grim shit to get onto the platform and weigh in successfully, as well as keeping in mind that you have to recomp and get yourself back up to your usual weight so you can perform and compete at your best. Because ultimately, it's not about how much you can lose, but how much you can recomp before you get onto the platform and compete. Because ultimately, that's what you're there to do. You're not there to cut weight. Cutting weight is not the goal. Getting on the platform and do your best, that's the goal. So if you are above 3% of your body weight, if you're doing 2-hour weigh-in, you need to get that down, and that's going to be done through doing like some type of chronic energy restriction for a long period of time, or until you get to that point. If you are doing a 24-hour weigh-in, you have a bit more of a wiggle room because you've got 24 hours to recomp that weight. So that's why you can push things up towards the 5-6 more percent, up to even 8% of your body weight. And that's why you can use things like sauna and not really have it to be as kind of effective on the likes of your performance, because you've got plenty of time to recover. You typically have a sleep in between the likes of that too, which is again kind of give you plenty of time to overcome any of the stress that you would have induced by doing the weight cut during the week. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But then also it's important to trial, right? So if say for example, I was coming into a competition where I needed to have 3% of my body weight lost, okay? And we didn't trial these methods, and we did that on the competition week, I would have missed weight. I would have missed weight for that competition, which is why it's important to trial these things. And typically when I'm working with somebody for nutrition, or I'm working with any of my powerlifters getting ready for competition, I will typically trial a weight cut with them. because you don't know how somebody's going to respond. You don't know how somebody's like physiology is going to respond to any of these protocols. You don't know how much of a kind of drain that one of these protocols can put on somebody's life. Like if you are working in a normal job and you're doing water load, it might not, or if you work as a bus driver, you work as a school teacher, like you're not going to be able to get up and down every 5 minutes to go take a piss. It's just, it can't happen. Your work doesn't allow it. So that water load strategy might be off the cards for you. Even somebody's ability to adhere to something like a gut cut or like a carb or fat manipulation, right? Some people just don't want to kind of have drastic changes to their food day to day. They might not be able to adhere to just like a couple of days of a different diet. And these are things, again, that you need to troubleshoot, you need to trial, you need to see how your body responds. Because ultimately, it could be the difference between you missing weight or getting onto the platform at the desired weight. So it's really worth having that bit of time far from competition to give it a go. For me, I just did it there just before I start my peak. So I will typically do it with clients during a deload week. When we're relatively close to competition, or even sometimes we'll just do it far away from competition, just so we don't have to kind of deal with any kind of unexpected travel that comes up closer to the meet, or any kind of unexpected opportunities or unexpected events, because again, other people have other things going on that may kind of prohibit them from doing some type of trial weight cut, or just might not make it feasible leading into a competition. So again, it's really going to be dependent on again, when life is also going to be set up for having testable conditions. If you are going to be looking to do a weight cut later on this year or at any point, definitely would recommend trialing one before you are going to implement one for the lifestyle competition. Find out what methods work best for you. Find out all those little kind of tweaks and changes that you can make to your own process. Establish a kind of good rhythm with if you're going to do a gut cut in regards to the food choices that you're going to make, and as well just how any kind of errors that you may make, anything you need to troubleshoot to have a smoother process the next time. Now, despite having good ideas to where potentially bottlenecks lie within our strategy and in our plan, and maybe improvements we can make for next time, still might not necessarily go to plan, right? It's like our theory may still not work out, and that's okay, because ultimately at the end of the day, the competition that I'm going to be doing, it is going to be low expectation in regards to I don't need to be a certain way. The only thing it's really going to affect in regards to the outcome is maybe a couple of dot points. So it's not really going to be a kind of make or break deal. But again, for me, it's important as a coach just to get this experience. And, it has also a little bit of excitement to the week too, right? From doing some type of cut. And from my experience so far, I've never really had any weight cuts affect my performance on the platform. So I know that it's a relatively low risk. And the fact that it is also 24 hours, it's even less risk. So that's going to be the kind of plan leading into this competition in regards to what we're going to do with the weight cut. Hopefully you get a little bit more than 3%. But if not, so be it. I'll still have got the experience of, okay, going through the fire again, and be able to kind of share all my experiences with the likes of you, with the likes of my clients, and have a little bit more kind of experiential knowledge versus just being able to kind of ream off the kind of facts and figures from the fucking textbooks. So I've kind of rambled plenty long in this podcast here. It's a bit more of a kind of, a bit more of a rambly one, but a bit more of a personal one too. So I'm very much looking forward to these final few weeks of prep, and it's kind of one of those things. It's it feels a bit strange or surreal. Like when I did my first squat session there of this peak on Sunday, I was like, I only have 4 more heavy singles left until I finish competing in powerlifting for a while. That's so weird. But with that, it also allows me to, again, kind of come back to what I mentioned earlier on in the podcast, or I can be more present. I can be more kind of grateful, thankful that I've been able to have such a good experience with doing powerlifting, and it's taught me so much about myself, and it's allowed me to also kind of create a career out of this. It's allowed me to help others with this too. So yeah, it's surreal, but look, we're going to close this chapter and we're going to start another chapter in a couple of weeks' time. But look, it's not as if we're giving up powerlifting forever. It's just a goodbye for now. But hopefully you did enjoy this podcast. If you did, please leave me a rating review on the podcast platform you're listening on. I look forward to kind of keeping you updated with the trajectory of this prep on the likes of Instagram. So keep an eye on there. But before I leave you, I would actually kind of ask a request, right? If you listen to this podcast I would love for you to kind of give me some kind of feedback on, like, things I could improve for the podcast, or even if it's just a case of you have specific questions that you'd like answered, if you have specific guests that you'd like to get on, because ultimately I want to make this podcast very much like more about you than about me. Like, don't want to be just talk about myself on these podcasts all the time, even if, like, and to be honest, I actually find talk about myself very uncomfortable. It just feels weird. Got that Irish shame. But if there are questions that you want answered, like, fire them away to me on Instagram. I'll either kind of make solo ones myself on them, covering them if I can, if I feel as if I've got the knowledge and expertise to do so. If I feel as if somebody out there would be better at addressing the question, I'll get them on as a podcast guest. But ultimately, I create this for you, the listener, and I want you to kind of upskill, learn, and become the strongest, most jacked trainee as you possibly can. And whatever is going to help you do so, I'm here for that. So yeah, if that's something that you have, again, questions, podcast guests, drop them to me on Instagram, and I'll be sure to do my best to try to book them in. Okay. All right. That's it. Have a great rest of your week, and we will talk in the next one.